The Cathari Dominion requested peace talks within 1 month of the Battle of New Boston. This surprised many observers because the Cathari had never requested peace in their entire history. They conquered or they were conquered. There was no middle ground, but the survivors of Draxon's fleet had told stories. They had described human ships charging directly into certain death. They had described a species that fought without hesitation, without mercy, without any concern for its own survival. They had described something that looked like madness but felt like something worse done. It felt like purpose. The Cathari High Council met in secret and made a decision that no Cathari leader had ever made before. They would ask for peace, not because they were defeated, but because they were afraid. For the first time in their history, they had met a species more willing to fight than they were. Admiral Christopher Blake traveled to Cathari Prime for the peace talks. He went alone in a single diplomatic shuttle, without any escort or military presence. Many people thought this was foolish. Some thought it was brave. Blake thought it was necessary. The Cathari High Council received him in their great hall, a massive space decorated with the trophies of 1,000 conquered worlds. Skulls and flags and weapons hung from the walls, reminders of every species that had fallen to Cathari strength. The prime of the Cathari, an ancient warrior named Carax, sat on a throne made from the bones of his enemies. He looked at the old human standing before him with something that might have been curiosity. "You come alone," Carax said. "Either you are very confident or very foolish." Blake smiled slightly. "I am neither. I am tired." "Tired? You won the battle. You destroyed our fleet. Your species should be celebrating. We do not celebrate war, Prime Carax. We endure it." The Cathari leader leaned forward. "I do not understand your species. You have more ships than any civilization in the galaxy. You have weapons that make ours look like children's toys. You could conquer half the known universe if you wanted to. Why do you not want to?" Blake was silent for a moment, gathering his thoughts. Then he spoke in a voice that carried to every corner of the great hall, "Because we have seen where that path leads." He raised his hand, and a holographic display appeared above it. Images of human history, the same images that Ambassador Veltrix had shown to the Galactic Council, but presented differently. Not as evidence of human power, but as evidence of human tragedy. These are our cities, burned by our own weapons. These are our children, killed by our own hands. These are the graves of 100 generations who died fighting wars that solved nothing and created nothing except more war. The images continued. Blake walked through them like a ghost walking through memories. "We do not want your worlds, Prime Carax. We do not want your submission or your tribute or your respect. We want to stop. We always want to stop. Every human who has ever gone to war has wanted, in their heart, for it to be the last war." He stopped in front of the Cathari throne and looked up at the ancient warrior. "We build monuments to our dead because we never want to forget them. We teach our children about the horror of war because we never want them to experience it. We fear conflict because we know, better than any species in this galaxy, exactly how terrible we become when we fight." Carax stared at the old human for a long time. "And yet you fought. When we attacked your colony, you did not negotiate. You did not retreat. You came with everything you had. Yes. Why?" Blake's voice was very quiet. "Because some things are worth protecting. Our people, our children, our right to live in peace. When those things are threatened, we do what we must. And then we spend the rest of our lives trying to make sure no one ever has to do it again." The great hall was silent. The Cathari warriors who lined the walls did not move. The counselors who surrounded the throne did not speak. Even the Prime seemed frozen, lost in thought. Finally, Carax stood. He was enormous, nearly twice Blake's height, covered in ritual scars that told the story of his long life of conquest. He walked down from his throne and stood directly in front of the human admiral. "My people have conquered for 10,000 years," he said slowly. "We believed that strength was the only thing that mattered, that the weak deserved to fall and the strong deserved to rule. Your species has shown us something different." He placed one massive hand on Blake's shoulder. "You are stronger than us. You proved that at New Boston. But you do not use your strength to conquer. You use it to protect. You use it to stop. You use it, and then you weep for the damage you have done." The Prime's voice was wondering, confused, but not hostile. "Perhaps we have been wrong. Perhaps strength alone is not enough. Perhaps what matters is what you do with strength, what you choose not to do." The peace treaty that followed was unprecedented. It did not simply end the conflict between Earth and the Cathari Dominion. It created something new. The new Galactic Compact was not a military alliance. It was a promise. A promise that the member species would seek peace first, always. A promise that war would be the last option, not the first. A promise that strength would be used to protect, not to conquer. 37 species eventually signed the compact. Some joined because they feared humanity. Others joined because they admired what humanity was trying to do. A few joined because they had their own dark histories, their own terrible memories, their own reasons to fear what they could become. High Counselor Thiessen, in his final address before retiring from the Galactic Council, summarized the moment best. "We thought the humans feared war because they were weak," he said, his crystal body glowing with colors that represented hope and humility. "We understand now that they feared it because they knew exactly how strong they were. They had looked into the darkness within themselves and seen something terrible. And instead of embracing that darkness, they had chosen to build something better." He paused, looking out at the assembled delegates. "That took more courage than any battle. That took more strength than any conquest. And that is why, of all the species in this galaxy, the humans may be the wisest." On Earth, the newly appointed Secretary General Lisa Grant watched the speech from her office. Daniel Ortega, now her Chief of Staff, stood beside her as always. "He called us wise," Daniel said with a slight smile. "Do you feel wise?" Lisa shook her head. "We are not wise. We are just tired." Daniel considered this. Maybe that is the same thing. Maybe wisdom is just knowing that some things are not worth fighting for. Knowing when to stop. Lisa did not answer. She walked to her window and looked out at the city below. It was a beautiful day. Children were playing in a park that had been built on the site of an ancient battlefield. They did not know what had happened there centuries ago. They did not know about the blood that had soaked into the ground, the lives that had been lost, the hatred that had burned. That was the point. That was why humans built parks on battlefields and schools on the ruins of fortresses. Not to forget the past, but to prove that the past did not have to define the future. "We will keep our fear," Lisa said quietly. "We will tend it carefully, like a fire that keeps the darkness away. We will pass it down to our children, and they will pass it to theirs. We will make sure that no human ever forgets what we are capable of." She turned back to face Daniel. "Because the day humanity stops fearing war will be the day the galaxy truly has something to fear." Outside her window, the children continued to play, their laughter rising into a sky that had seen so much sorrow and so much hope that the humans would keep their vigil. They would maintain their strength and their restraint. They would remember their history and teach their children. And they would hope, always hope, that the monsters they used to be would never return. It was not a perfect solution. It was not even a permanent one. But it was the best they could do. And for now, for today, it was enough. The story of humanity in the galaxy had only just begun. There would be more challenges, more threats, more moments when the old darkness threatened to return. But there would also be more chances to prove that the humans had truly changed, that their fear of war was genuine, that their desire for peace was real. They had shown the galaxy what they could destroy. Now they would show the galaxy what they could build. And that, in the end, would be their greatest victory of all. The emergency session of the Galactic Council began 3 days after the Battle of New Boston. Every species sent their most senior representatives. Every seat in the Great Chamber was filled. Even species that had not attended a council meeting in centuries sent observers. They all wanted to understand what had happened. They all wanted to know if they were safe. Ambassador Veltrix stood at the central platform again, but this time there was no laughter. His 4 eyes were dark with exhaustion, and his voice trembled as he spoke. "I must begin with an apology," he said. "My previous report on humanity was wrong. Not partially wrong. Completely, dangerously, catastrophically wrong." The chamber was silent. We assumed that their fear of war was a sign of weakness. We believed that a species which built monuments to the dead and taught its children to hate conflict must be soft and easily conquered. We were so confident in this belief that we shared it with the entire galaxy. He lowered his head. That belief may have caused the deaths of over 20,000 Cathari soldiers. "Hi." Councillor Thiessen spoke from his floating platform. "Explain, Ambassador. We have all heard reports of the battle. What we do not understand is how it happened. The humans should not have been able to respond so quickly. They should not have been able to fight so effectively. Everything we knew about them suggested they would negotiate or retreat." Veltrix activated his holographic display. "That is because everything we knew about them was incomplete. We studied their behavior since joining the galactic community. We should have studied their history." The display changed to show images that made several delegates gasp or look away. "This is their homeworld approximately 100 years ago," Veltrix explained. "What you are seeing is something they called the Second World War. In this single conflict, they killed over 70 million of their own kind. 70 million. The number hung in the air like a curse. This is their first attempt to destroy a city with a single weapon." The image showed a mushroom cloud rising over a place called Hiroshima. They developed this technology while still confined to a single planet. They used it on themselves, twice. The display continued to change. Wars, genocides, famines caused by conflict, weapons that poisoned the land for generations, images of suffering that seemed endless. "In 10,000 years of recorded history," Veltrix said quietly, "humanity has known perhaps 300 years of total peace. Not consecutive years. 300 years total, scattered across their entire existence. They have been at war with themselves almost constantly since they learned to make tools." The Morvani delegate spoke softly. "How is that possible? How did they not destroy themselves?" "They nearly did. Multiple times. They came within minutes of ending all life on their planet. Not once, many times." Veltrix's voice was hollow. "And each time, somehow, they stopped. They pulled back from the edge. They chose to survive." He changed the display to show something different. Schools, hospitals, aid organizations, monuments and memorials, peace treaties and humanitarian efforts. After each catastrophe, they tried to become better. They created laws against war crimes. They built organizations dedicated to preventing conflict. They taught their children about the horrors of their past so those children would never repeat them. "But why?" Thiessen asked. "If they were so good at war, why would they want to stop?" Veltrix turned to face the High Counselor directly. "Because they were too good at it. They realized that if they kept fighting, they would eventually destroy themselves completely. Their fear of war is not weakness, counselor. It is survival instinct. It is the desperate choice of a species that looked at what it was capable of and decided that it had to change or die. He paused to let this sink in. When they joined the galactic community, they made a decision. They would be peaceful. They would negotiate and compromise and retreat. They would let other species laugh at them and call them cowards. Because the alternative was becoming what they used to be. And now? Asked the Cathari representative, a minor official who had been sent because no senior Cathari would attend the session. What happens now that they have fought again? Veltrix turned off his display. I do not know. That is what frightens me. The chamber erupted in anxious discussion. Delegates argued about what should be done. Some wanted to form alliances with humanity immediately. Others wanted to demand restrictions on human military power. A few even suggested attacking while the humans were still recovering from the battle. But one voice cut through the noise. It was Thesan, the ancient crystal being, speaking with the weight of 50,000 years of experience. You are all missing the point, he said. We are not discussing a strategic problem. We are discussing something far more important. The chamber fell silent. The humans feared war because they knew themselves. They understood their own capacity for violence in a way that most species never do. They chose to reject that capacity, to build a civilization based on peace and cooperation, even though it meant being mocked by the rest of the galaxy. He rose from his platform and floated to the center of the chamber. And we, in our arrogance, forced them to abandon that choice. We pushed them until they had no option but to fight. And now we have seen what they were afraid of. We have seen what they become when they stop being peaceful. He turned slowly, looking at each delegation in turn. The question is not what we should do about humanity. The question is what we have done to ourselves. We had neighbors who chose peace, even though they could have been conquerors. We had friends who built weapons but refused to use them. And we laughed at them for it. His crystal body pulsed with a color that his species used to express deep shame. We should not have laughed. The session continued for many more hours. But those words remained in every delegate's mind. They had made assumptions about a species they did not understand. They had confused restraint for weakness. They had pushed until the restraint broke, and now they had to live with the consequences. In her temporary office on the orbital station above New Boston, Commander Lisa Grant watched the council session through a secure feed. She had been promoted to Admiral after the battle, a recognition of her long service and her role in preparing humanity for this moment. She did not feel proud. She felt tired and sad and deeply worried about what would come next. Captain Daniel Ortega sat beside her, watching the same feed. They finally understand, he said quietly. Do they? Lisa shook her head. They understand that we are dangerous. I am not sure they understand why we tried so hard not to be. What do you mean? Lisa turned off the display and looked out the window at the stars. For 40 years, we kept the peace. For 40 years, we let them mock us and insult us and treat us like prey. We did it because we remembered what happens when we fight. We did it because we loved our children more than we loved our pride. She closed her eyes. And now? Now we have killed again. Now we have shown the galaxy what we are capable of. How long before some other species decides to test us? How long before we have to fight again? And again? How long before we become what we used to be? Daniel had no answer. Outside the window, the stars continued to burn, indifferent to the fears of the small creatures who lived among them. The humans had won a battle. But Lisa Grant was not sure. They had not lost something far more important. She hoped she was wrong. She feared she was not. The first human ships appeared at the edge of the new Boston system like ghosts stepping out of the darkness. One moment there was empty space. The next moment there were 10 ships, then 50, then 100. Warlord Draxon watched his sensor display with growing confusion. His officers were shouting numbers at him, but the numbers did not make sense. 200 ships. 250. 300. That is impossible, he said. No species can move that many ships that quickly. His tactical officer, a young Cathari named Vorath, was trembling. Warlord, they're not stopping. They are coming directly toward us. At full speed. Draxon looked at the display again. The human fleet was not forming defensive lines. They were not waiting to negotiate. They were charging forward like a wave of metal and fire, spreading out to surround the Cathari position. Open a channel, he ordered. Demand they explain themselves. The channel opened, and Draxon found himself looking at an old human male with white hair and tired eyes. This was Admiral Christopher Blake, though Draxon did not know his name yet. Human Commander, Draxon growled. What is the meaning of this? We are engaged in a legitimate territorial dispute. The Galactic Council has not. The Galactic Council is not here, the old human said quietly. I am. You cannot threaten the Cathari Dominion. We have treaties. We have rights under galactic law. If you attack us, you will face consequences from every warlord. The human's voice cut through Draxon's speech like a blade. You came to our world with weapons armed. You threatened our people. You gave them 12 hours to surrender. The old man leaned forward slightly. Your 12 hours ended 3 hours ago. You are still here. Draxon felt something he had not felt in a very long time. It took him a moment to recognize the sensation that it was fear. We can negotiate, he said quickly. Perhaps we were hasty. Perhaps there is a diplomatic solution that... There was a diplomatic solution. Governor Santos offered it to you. You laughed at her. The old human's face did not change. His voice did not rise. But something in his eyes made Draxon want to look away. I am giving you one chance, Warlord. One chance more than you gave our people. Withdraw now. Leave this system. Never return. Draxon's pride would not let him accept. His officers were watching. His reputation depended on strength. He could not back down from a species that everyone in the galaxy knew was weak and afraid. We are Cathari, he said, forcing confidence into his voice. We do not run from battle. The old human nodded slowly. There was no anger in his expression, only sadness. No, he said quietly. I suppose you do not. The channel closed. 10 seconds later, the human fleet opened fire. What followed would be studied by military academies across the galaxy for centuries. It would be called the Battle of New Boston, though it was not really a battle. A battle implies that both sides have a chance of winning. The Cathari had no chance. Human ships did not fight the way other species fought. They did not maintain safe distances, did not calculate acceptable losses, did not preserve their forces for future engagements. They fought as if every second mattered, as if every enemy ship was a personal threat to someone they loved. Captain Sandra Moore commanded the destroyer ESS Defiant. She was 38 years old, the daughter of a farmer and a schoolteacher, and she had never killed anyone in her life. When the battle began, she found herself leading her ship directly into the heart of the Cathari formation. Captain, her first officer shouted over the sound of weapons fire. We are taking heavy damage. We should pull back and... Negative. Sandra's voice was steady, even as her ship shook around her. The colony is behind us. If we pull back, they get past us. We cannot stop them all. Sandra looked at her display. 3 Cathari ships were breaking formation, trying to get past the human fleet to attack the planet below. She calculated the angles, the speeds, the possibilities. There was only one option. All power to engines, she ordered. put us between them and the colony. Her ship surged forward, positioning itself directly in the path of the Cathari vessels. The enemy ships fired everything they had at her dot. Sandra held her position. The first volley tore through her shields. The second ripped open her hull. The third killed 17 of her crew. She held her position. Through the smoke and fire and screaming alarms, she kept her ship exactly where it needed to be. A wall of metal and determination between the enemy and 3 million innocent people. You want to know why we fear war? She said over an open channel, her voice broadcasting to every ship in the system. Because we know what we become when we fight, and we hate what we become. Our weapons officer, Lieutenant Kevin Price, was bleeding from a wound on his forehead. His console was sparking and half his controls were dead. But his targeting system still worked. Target locked on enemy flagship, he reported. Sandra nodded. Fire. The Defiant's main cannon discharged once. The beam of energy crossed the distance between ships in less. Then a second and struck Warlord Draxon's flagship directly in its reactor core. The explosion was visible. From the planet's surface dot around the battlefield, Cathari ships began to break and run. They had expected easy prey. They had expected a species that feared war to cower and surrender. Instead, they found themselves facing something they had never encountered before. They faced humans who were no longer afraid. Admiral Blake watched the battle from the bridge of his flagship. He gave orders calmly, moved ships efficiently, and coordinated the destruction of the Cathari fleet with the precision of a surgeon, removing a tumor, but his hands were shaking when the last enemy ship fled into hyperspace. When the guns finally fell silent, the old admiral sat down heavily in his chair and put his face in his hands. Around him, his officers waited. They had won. They had saved the colony. They had done what they were trained to do, but none of them cheered. None of them celebrated. Captain Daniel Ortega, serving as Blake's aide, approached quietly. Admiral, are you all right? Blake looked up. His eyes were wet. 9 ships, he said quietly. We lost 9 ships. That is over 2,000 people. Sons and daughters. Fathers and mothers, gone. He stood slowly and walked to the viewport, looking out at the debris field that had once been the Cathari fleet. And them? How many of them did we kill? 10,000? 20? They had families too. They had people who loved them. Daniel did not know what to say. This is why we fear war, Captain, Blake said quietly. Not because we are weak. Because we know the cost. We always know the cost. He turned away from the viewport. Send medical ships to search for survivors. Cathari survivors. Save everyone we can. Sir, they came to kill our people, Captain. That does not mean we have to become monsters. He walked off the bridge, leaving Daniel to give the orders. In the wreckage of the Defiant, rescue teams found Captain Sandra Moore still alive. Her ship was destroyed, but she had managed to protect her surviving crew until help arrived. She would spend 6 months in a hospital recovering from her wounds. She would receive the highest medal humanity could offer. She would be called a hero by billions of people. But for the rest of her life, she would wake up at night remembering the sound of Cathari ships dying, remembering the lives she had ended, remembering the person she had become in those terrible hours. This was the human way of war. Fight with everything you have. Win at any cost. And then carry the weight of what you did forever. Only 3 Cathari ships escaped to tell the galaxy what had happened at New Boston. The galaxy listened. And the galaxy began to understand. The colony world of New Boston orbited a yellow star in a quiet corner of human space. It was not a rich world or an important one. 3 million people lived there, mostly farmers and miners and the families who supported them. They had built small towns with simple names. planted crops that reminded them of Earth, and raised children who had never known the homeworld. Governor Maria Santos had led this colony for 12 years. She was a small woman with gray hair and kind eyes, the sort of person who remembered everyone's name and never raised her voice. The colonists loved her because she listened to them, solved their problems, and never made them feel small. When the Cathari fleet appeared in orbit, Maria was eating breakfast with her husband. Her communication device buzzed with an emergency alert, and she read the message 3 times before she believed it. 40 warships. Cathari markings. Weapons armed. She kissed her husband goodbye and walked to the government building without running. The streets were still quiet. Most people did not know yet. She wanted to keep it that way for as long as possible. Her military advisor, Colonel Benjamin Hayes, met her in the Situation Room. He was a large man with a scarred face and hands that shook slightly when he was angry. They were shaking now. 3 patrol vessels, he said. That is all we have. 3 patrol vessels against 40 warships. Maria sat down and looked at the tactical display. The Cathari fleet hung in space like a swarm of metal insects, their weapons pointed at her world. At her people? Have they made demands? She asked. Surrender. Complete and unconditional. They want the colony. Maria nodded slowly. She had read about the Cathari. They were conquerors. They believed that strength was the only thing that mattered, that the strong had the right to take from the weak. They had conquered 6 star systems in the last century, and they thought humans were weak. Open a channel to their commander, she said. Benjamin stared at her. Governor, we cannot fight them. We need to evacuate. We need to open the channel, Colonel. Her voice was still soft, still kind, but there was something in it that made Benjamin obey without another word. The holographic display flickered, and the face of Warlord Draxon appeared. He was massive, even by Cathari standards, his scales dark red and covered with ritual scars that marked his victories. His eyes were yellow and cold. Human female, he said. You speak for this world? I do. Then hear my terms. Surrender now, and your people will be allowed to serve the Dominion. Resist, and you will all die. This is not a negotiation. Maria looked at this creature who thought he could take her world. She thought about the people outside, the children playing in the streets, the farmers working their fields. She thought about what would happen to them under Cathari rule, and then she thought about something else. Something that every human leader knew but never spoke about. Something called the Cole Protocol. Warlord Draxon, she said calmly, you have 24 hours to withdraw from this system. This is not a request. The Cathari commander made a sound that might have been laughter. You threaten me? With 3 ships? I am not threatening you. I am warning you. Right now, my government is deciding whether to activate something we call the Cole Protocol. You do not want that. Draxon leaned forward, his yellow eyes narrowing. What is this protocol? Maria paused. She had never spoken these words before. No human leader had needed to speak them for 40 years. But she knew them. Every human knew them, passed down through generations like a prayer or a curse. It means we stop being afraid. The Cathari stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed, a harsh barking sound that made his scales rattle. Afraid? Yes, your species is famous for its fear. Very well, human female. Keep your protocol. I will give you 12 hours instead of 24. When the time ends, we will take your world, whether you resist or not. The connection closed. Benjamin Hayes stood in silence for a moment. Then he spoke quietly. Governor, what is the Cole Protocol? Maria did not answer. She was already composing a message to Earth. The message was short. It contained only 3 words and a set of coordinates. Cole Protocol activated, 6 light years away. In the headquarters of the Earth Defense Fleet. Admiral Christopher Blake received the message. He was an old man now, 72 years old, his hair white and his face lined with decades of waiting. He had joined the fleet as a young officer, full of hope that he would never have to fight. He had spent 50 years preparing for a war he prayed would never come. The prayer had not been answered. He read the message once. Then he walked to his window and looked out at the orbital station where his fleet waited. 300 warships, the most powerful force ever assembled by humanity. Ships named after old battles and old heroes, carrying weapons that could crack planets and burn stars. For 40 years, these ships had never fired in anger. For 40 years, they had waited. The waiting was over. Christopher picked up his communication device and opened a channel to every ship in the fleet. "All vessels," he said. His voice was calm and tired and terribly sad. "This is Admiral Blake. We have received a cold protocol activation from New Boston Colony. The Cathari Dominion has attacked our people." He paused. Around him, he knew that thousands of men and women were stopping what they were doing, looking up, listening to words they had trained their whole lives to hear. "I know what you are feeling right now. I feel it too. Fear. And something else. Something we do not like to talk about. Something we hoped we would never feel again." He closed his eyes. "We are going to New Boston. We are going to protect our people. And we are going to show the Cathari what humanity becomes when it stops being afraid." He opened his eyes. "All ships, prepare for immediate departure. We jump in 1 hour." Across the fleet, engines began to warm. Weapon systems came online. Soldiers checked their equipment and said quiet goodbyes to photographs of loved ones. None of them wanted this. All of them were afraid. Not of dying. Not of the enemy. They were afraid of themselves. Of what they knew they could do. Of what they knew they would do. 1 hour later, 300 ships disappeared into hyperspace, leaving nothing behind but fading light. On New Boston, Warlord Draxon watched his countdown timer and smiled. In 11 hours, he would add another world to the Dominion's empire. He had no idea that his entire understanding of humanity was about to be destroyed, along with most of his fleet. The Great Chamber of the Galactic Council was the largest room ever built by any species in the known universe. Its walls stretched upward for nearly a mile, covered in the flags and symbols of 200 different civilizations. Floating platforms carried delegates from worlds that had never known war and worlds that had known nothing else. The air itself was a carefully controlled mixture that allowed beings of every biology to breathe and speak and argue. Today, the chamber was filled with quiet laughter. Ambassador Veltrix of the Drelloni species stood at the central speaking platform, his 4 eyes blinking rapidly as he presented his findings. The Drelloni were known throughout the galaxy as excellent observers. They had studied every major species for thousands of years, and their reports were considered the most accurate in existence. But today, even Veltrix seemed confused by his own data. "The humans are a puzzle," he admitted to the assembled delegates. "They have been members of our galactic community for 40 standard years. In that time, they have not started a single war. They have not conquered a single world. They have not even threatened another species." A ripple of amusement passed through the chamber. The Cathari delegate, a massive creature covered in hard scales, made a sound that his translation device rendered as contemptuous laughter. "They are weak," the Cathari said. "We have known this since they first made contact." Veltrix raised one of his 4 hands. "Please, allow me to continue. The situation is more complex than simple weakness." He activated a holographic display that showed images from Earth and its colonies. Monuments made of stone and metal. Walls covered with names. Fields of small white crosses stretching to the horizon. "They build these structures everywhere," Veltrix explained. "They are called memorials. They exist to remember their dead soldiers from past conflicts, not to celebrate them, to mourn them. High Counselor Thyssen leaned forward on his floating platform. Thyssen was ancient, even by galactic standards. His body was made of living crystal that had grown and changed for over 50,000 years. He had watched empires rise and fall. He had seen species evolve from savagery to civilization and sometimes back again. "This is unusual?" he asked. "Many species honor their fallen warriors." "Honor, yes," Veltrix agreed. "But the humans do not speak of honor when they discuss these places. They speak of tragedy, of waste, of something they call the horror of war." He changed the display to show human educational materials. Young human children sat in rooms, while adults showed them images of destruction and death. The children looked frightened. Some were crying. "They teach their young to fear conflict," Veltrix continued. "Their most celebrated stories are not tales of glorious conquest. They are warnings, tragedies. Their heroes are often those who stopped wars, not those who won them." The Morvani delegate, a gentle being made of flowing water contained in a force field, spoke softly. "Perhaps they are simply a peaceful species. The universe has many such peoples." "That was my first thought as well," Veltrix admitted. "But peaceful species do not build weapons like this." The display changed again, and the laughter in the chamber died. The images showed human warships, not small patrol vessels or defensive platforms. These were massive engines of destruction, bristling with weapons that even the warlike Cathari did not possess. The ships filled entire orbital stations. There were thousands of them. "They call this the Earth Defense Fleet," Veltrix said quietly. "It is the largest military force in the known galaxy. By a significant margin." Silence filled the chamber. "If they are peaceful," Thyssen said slowly, "why do they build such things?" Veltrix's four eyes blinked in what his species used to express uncertainty. "I do not know." When asked, they say the same thing repeatedly. They say they hope they will never have to use them. They say they build them so they will never have to fight. They say they fear war. The Cathari delegate made another contemptuous sound. "Fear. Exactly as I said. They are cowards hiding behind big ships. If they truly feared nothing, they would use that fleet to take what they wanted. Instead, they negotiate. They compromise. They back down from every confrontation." Many delegates nodded in agreement. It was true that humans had avoided every potential conflict since joining the galactic community. Border disputes were settled with treaties. Trade disagreements ended in compromise. When the Vorn Collective had insulted Earth's ambassador, the humans had simply requested a formal apology, rather than demanding satisfaction through combat. "Perhaps the Cathari analysis is correct," Thyssen mused. "They have the weapons of conquerors, but the hearts of prey animals. A strange combination." Far from the council chamber, in a small monitoring station hidden in an asteroid field, Commander Lisa Grant listened to every word. The station was one of hundreds that Earth had secretly placed throughout the galaxy. The Galactic Council did not know they existed. No one did. That was exactly how humanity wanted it. Lisa was 47 years old. She had served in the Earth Defense Fleet for 25 of those years. She had trained for wars that never came. She had studied tactics for battles she hoped would never happen. And she had watched, year after year, as alien species laughed at her people and called them cowards. Captain Daniel Ortega stood beside her, his dark eyes fixed on the holographic display showing the council session. He was younger than Lisa by a decade, but his face carried the same weight, the same knowledge. "They really believe it," he said quietly. "They think we are afraid because we are weak." Lisa nodded slowly. She thought about her grandfather, who had fought in something called the Pacific War. She thought about her great-grandmother, who had survived something called the Holocaust. She thought about the stories that every human child learned, the terrible stories that made them cry and have nightmares. "They do not understand," she replied. "How could they? They have never seen what we have seen. They have never done what we have done. Should we tell them?" Lisa considered this question. It was the same question that human leaders had debated for 40 years. Should they explain to the galaxy why humanity feared war? Should they show them the records, the histories, the mountains of dead that stretched back to the beginning of human civilization? "No," she finally said. "Let them believe we are cowards. Let them laugh. As long as they are laughing, they are not fighting us." Daniel frowned. "And when they stop laughing? When one of them decides to test us?" Lisa turned away from the display. Her face was calm, but her eyes held something old and cold and terrible. "Then God help them," she said, "because we will not be able to help ourselves." She walked away, leaving Daniel alone with the sound of alien laughter. He wondered how long the peace would last. He wondered which species would be foolish enough to break it. And he wondered, not for the first time, whether humanity would ever truly escape the shadow of its own history in the council chamber. The delegates continued their discussion, confident in their understanding of the strange, fearful humans. They had no idea how wrong they were. They would learn.